Welcome back to the Fourth and Long podcast with your host, Alec Peccato. Today's show, we will be going over my Big Ten College Football 2024 preview with my bowl teams, non-bowl teams, sleepers, potential conference winners, and I will be giving you my final record prediction for all Big Ten schools at the end of the video, so stick around. But let's get started here. Before we get into the pretense of the video, I want to say that I appreciate all the support I've received on my College Football 25 Dynasty with South Florida. And that's going to continue. We will have an episode tonight at 10 o'clock, as well as at 7:07 tonight. We will have the Rays and Blue Jays live reaction to my first Rays game, doing live reaction for the second half. And throughout the rest of this month, we will also have more college football conference previews and a lot more as we start to get rolling with the college football season. And I will be giving you all my opinion on who I think is going to win every conference. And then before the first week of the season, we will have my preseason awards, my obviously who I think is going to win every conference, and a lot more. But let's get into today's video. So here are my non-bowl teams for the Big Ten this year. And there is 4 non-bowl teams. The first one is Maryland. Now, Maryland has lost a couple of players. They've lost a couple. They lost a bunch last year, a bunch of starters. Talia Tagovailoa went to the NFL. They lost a couple wide receivers. They lost a running back. I think Maryland's going to I know some people think that Maryland is going to take a step forward with a new quarterback this year. I don't. I see them taking a giant step backwards and being a disappointment this year. And I don't, but hear me out. I don't think Mike Locksley is on the hot seat. Now, if they get off to a really, really bad start, like they're 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, 1-5, then maybe I think that Mike Locksley's hot seat starts to heat up. But if they get off to a good start, you'll see my official record prediction for Maryland later on. But if they get off to a hot start, maybe that cools off his hot seat a little bit. The next non-bowl team I have in the Big Ten is Indiana. And this one, I do think Indiana is going to be competitive, though. I don't think they're going to be the laughingstock of the Big Ten. You'll see who I think the laughingstock of the Big Ten is going to be in a little bit for the non-bowl teams. But for me, Indiana, I like the hire of of Kirk Cignetti from James Madison. I really like that hire. But Indiana fans, I think it's going to take a couple of years. You're going to be competitive this year, but I don't think you're going to make just a little look ahead. I don't think you're making a bowl game this year. The next non-bowl team I have in the Big Ten is Purdue. And I like the direction they're heading in, but the Big Ten, it's no joke this year how good the Big Ten is going to be. And I just don't, for Purdue, I don't see a way they win more than 5 games. I don't see it. I've looked at their schedule numerous times. Ryan Walters is a good head coach, but I could see Purdue struggling again this year. Hopefully, hopefully they stay healthy. Hopefully they stay healthy and they can build off what's probably going to be another disappointing season. But for Purdue, that's it. For the next team for me that's not going to make a bowl game is Illinois. And the difference between Illinois and Maryland is I think Brett Bielema is on the hot seat. And I think his hot seat is extremely hot. If they start 0-4, 0-5, don't be surprised if Bielema gets fired at all. Don't be surprised if he's let go and they bring in an interim. Now we get to my sleeper teams in the Big Ten for 2024. And there's 3. The first one is USC. Now, I have my doubts about USC. I have my doubts about their defense, but it looks like they're trying to take that seriously this year. They hired a defensive coordinator that I think might be able to help the defense around. But the problem is they're playing in the Big Ten now. And offense is at a premium in the Big Ten. So if you don't have a good defense, there's absolutely zero chance you have of competing. But I do like the reason for me that USC is a sleeper in the Big Ten is, correction, I missed the bowl teams. Completely missed the bowl teams. Let's get to the bowl teams. There is 5 bowl teams. The first one is Michigan State. And for me, I think Michigan State is going to be really competitive in year 1 under Jonathan Smith. I will give you their record prediction, their official record prediction later on in the show. But I like the hire of Jonathan Smith. I think that Jonathan Smith, Michigan State, I think they will be competitive. But I think it's going to take 1 or 2 years for them to actually win the Big Ten. Because he needs to get his feet under him and learn how to recruit in the Big Ten. Because he was recruiting in the Pac-12 the last couple of years. But I like Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. The next bowl team I have is, and Michigan fans, I'm sorry, it's Michigan. I think Michigan is going to take a slight step backwards this year because they lost a ton. They lost a lot. They lost Roman Wilson, J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum. And I think I'm probably missing more. They did have a couple offensive linemen leave for the draft. And they got a new head coach. And the other thing I'm skeptical about, who's their quarterback going to be? They still haven't named a starting quarterback. Is it going to be Alex Orji? Or is it going to be somebody else? Or do they go hot? Do they go into the portal? Well, no, the portal's already closed. I was going to say, do they go into the portal and get an experienced quarterback? But they can't because the portal's already closed. So, but I see Michigan taking a step back. The next bowl team I have is Northwestern. Now, last year, I was wrong. And I will admit it. I was wrong about Northwestern last year. Very wrong. I had no expectations. Now, I have slight expectations for them now. But I think Northwestern is going to make a bowl game this year. I don't know how, but I think they do. The next bowl team I have is UCLA. Now, if you would have asked me to tell you, would UCLA make a bowl game 3 months ago after they lost Bielema, I would have told you absolutely not. They're not going to, they wouldn't make a bowl game, but DeAndre Foster is the new head coach. And I like that. I like that they brought him back because he was on Chip Kelly's staff and he could have left and took a job somewhere else, but he stayed around and now he's the head coach at UCLA. And I think UCLA will make a bowl game this year. And then the last bowl team I have is Minnesota. Now, Gavin Wimsatt is the quarterback at Minnesota. And I think I like that for Minnesota. I think Minnesota makes a bowl game this year. Now we get to my sleepers. And I have 3 sleeper teams in the Big Ten. I mentioned USC earlier when I made the mistake of not telling you my bowl teams for the Big Ten, but my sleepers for the Big Ten. My number 3 sleeper is USC. And let me rephrase what I said a minute ago. It is, I think USC could be a big-time sleeper in the Big Ten if they figure out how to play defense and hold teams under 30 points consistently. If they can do that, they're right along the top echelon of teams in the Big Ten that I think are sleepers. My number 2 team that's a sleeper in the Big Ten for me is Washington. They pried away Jedd Fisch from Arizona. And Will Rogers transferred there, and then Will Rogers ended up jumping in the portal, but somehow Jedd Fisch convinced him to come back and go back to Washington, and that's a big thing for me. If a quarterback jumps in the portal because a new head coach comes in, but that new head coach gets him to stay, it takes the cake for me for being a good offer. And that means that Washington for me is a sleeper. And my last sleeper in the Big Ten, and this might surprise some people, I think this team is going to have a better offense this year because all their playmaker, all their skill position players are healthy. It is Iowa. I know Iowa was horrible on offense last year. And now that they don't have Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz as their offense coordinator anymore, I think they're going to be a lot better on offense. Now we get to my contenders for the Big Ten this year. My first contender, and I have 3 in this category. My first contender is Wisconsin. With Wisconsin, they got transfer quarterback Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, who I guess Miami just decided, okay, we're going to give up on him and get Cam Ward and Reese Poffenberger. But with Wisconsin, the thing that's going to make or break their season is their week 3 game against Alabama. If they beat Alabama, that's going to mean that they are going to be one of the top in the top echelon of the Big Ten. If they lose to Alabama, that might mean they might have another mediocre season. And we'll see how they do against Alabama. My number 2 contender in the Big Ten is another surprise, Rutgers. I think Rutgers is going to be good this year. I know some people have them at 7 wins. You'll see in a few minutes where I have them in the rankings. I mean, record-wise. And the last contender in the Big Ten that I have is Nebraska. I think, and you can clip this part of the video if I'm right, I think Nebraska is going to be much improved this year, not only on offense, but on defense. And I like them stealing Dylan Raiola away from Georgia. Raiola, it's the third different team Raiola's committed to. He committed to Ohio State, decommitted, committed to Georgia, decommitted from Georgia, committed to Nebraska. And I think Dylan, mark my words, I think Dylan Raiola is going to make an immediate impact for Nebraska this year. Immediate. I think he starts week 1 for Nebraska. And next, we have potential conference winners in the Big Ten for me this year. And there's 3. One of them might surprise you. 2 of them are kind of obvious who it is. One's Ohio State. If you look what the Buckeyes have done in the portal, getting Caleb Downs, getting Quinshon Judkins, getting some upgrades along the offensive line, getting Caleb Downs on defense, getting the number 1 quarterback in the portal, Julian Sayin, getting Will Howard. They are loading up for a national championship this year. And I think this is a big year for Ryan Day. If Ryan Day and Ohio State don't win the national championship, I think Ryan Day, and it's unfortunate, I think Ryan Day might be on the hot seat. Number 2 contender, potential conference winner in the Big Ten is Penn State. Now, with Penn State, they get lucky this year. They don't have to play Michigan and Ohio State. They only have to play Ohio State. And I think they might lose you. You're going to see in a little bit where I have Penn State, what their record is. But I can see Penn State finishing maybe first or second in the Big Ten. And then the last potential conference winner is Oregon. And look what Dan Lanning did in the portal and in recruiting. I think Oregon is making some serious noise in year 1 in the Big Ten. And now we got my top 5 teams in the Big Ten for 2024. At number 5 is Iowa. And I just mentioned earlier why I think they're a sleeper in the Big Ten, but why I also think they might be able to finish in the top 5. Their defense is going to be one of the best in the Big Ten. And that's what Kirk Ferentz has always been known for at Iowa, is good defenses. Number 4, Wisconsin. Wisconsin, same thing. They've been known for their defense, but over the years, they've had good offenses too. Number 3 is Penn State. Now, like I said, I'm a little skeptical about putting Penn State this high because I feel like Penn State, there's a few games on their schedule that are winnable, but there's also a few that are very, very much toss-ups. At number 2 is Oregon. And Oregon, like I just said a minute ago, very good at recruiting. Dan Lanning, you can give him his flowers, as I like to say, in recruiting. And then at number 1 is Ohio State. And I think that's everybody's favorite to win the Big Ten this year. Everybody's favorite. Now, before we get to the record predictions, I want to say, if you haven't already, if you're over on the Twitch app, my link to my YouTube is in my bio. Come on over and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get more of this type of content. And because during the college football season, the second week of the season, I will be in Virginia, Blacksburg, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Marshall. I will be streaming live with the podcast from Blacksburg that entire weekend. And also you can become, if you feel like it, become an MVP. You get first dibs on the upset picks every week. You get premium content, which is the upset picks. You get my best bets for the week and a lot more. And also, that's only $14.99 a month to become an MVP. And also, merch. There is a merch website. I highly recommend buying merch. But now, let's get to the official record predictions for every Big Ten team. We're going to start with Illinois. And they start week 1 at home against Eastern Illinois. I think this is an easy win for Illinois, so they're 1-0. They play Kansas at home. Now, can you convince me that they're going to beat Kansas? Yes. Do they? I don't think they do. They're 1-1. Then they play Central Michigan at home. Homecoming. Do they beat Central Michigan? Yes, I think they do. So they're 2-1. Then they play at Nebraska. I think they lose to Nebraska. So they're 2-2. They play Penn State on the road at Beaver Stadium. They lose to Penn State. So they're now 2-3. Then they come out of the bye week. They play Purdue. I think they get to 3-3. So they're 3-3 after beating Purdue. They lose to Michigan. 3-4. Lose to Oregon. 3-5. Lose to Minnesota. 3-6. Lose to Michigan State. 3-7. Lose to Rutgers. 4-3-8, and beat Northwestern 4-8. So my official record prediction for Illinois is 4-8 for the 2024 season. The next Big Ten team we're going to go to is Purdue. And unfortunately for Purdue, I think it's going to be the same thing. Hold up, I'm trying to get to Purdue. Hold up. Go Purdue. Here we go. So Purdue, they start the year at home against Indiana State. That's a 1-1-0. Then they go into their bye week. So they're 1-0. They come out. They play Notre Dame at home. That's going to be a loss. So they're 1-1 at Oregon State. Win. So they're 1-1. No, they're 2-1. Nebraska at home. Loss 2-2. Wisconsin on the road. I think they get destroyed by Wisconsin. So that's a loss. So they're 2-3 now. They lose to Illinois 2-4. Lose to Oregon 2-5. Come out of the bye week. Beat Northwestern 3-5. Lose to Ohio State 3-6. Lose to Penn State 3-7. Beat Michigan State 4-7 and lose to Indiana 4-8. So Purdue also goes 4-8. Now we get to Indiana. So Indiana, and this is the non-bowl teams in the Big Ten. I'm doing this like I did the standings. So Indiana, they start the year at home against FIU. That's a win. They're going to start 2-0. They beat FIU in Western Illinois. Then they travel to Pasadena, California to play UCLA. And I think that's where they take their first loss. So they're 2-1. They come back home, play Charlotte. And I think they beat Charlotte So they're 3-1. Then they play Maryland at home. And this is kind of a toss-up for me. I think they could beat Maryland, but at the same time, I think they could also lose to Maryland. So I think they lose to Maryland here. So they're 3-2. Then they play Northwestern, 3-3. They're going to lose to Northwestern. They lose to Nebraska, 3-4. Lose to Washington, 3-5. Lose to Michigan State, 3-6. Ooh. And then they lose. So then they get Ohio State. They lose to Ohio State 4-8, 3-8, and then they beat. I think I had them beating Purdue. So they're 4-8. So Purdue, Illinois, Indiana go 4-8. Now we're going to get to Maryland. So Maryland starts the year at home against UConn. I think they beat UConn, so they're 1-0. Then they play Michigan State. That's a loss. 1-1. At Virginia win. 2-1. 3-1 after beating Villanova. 4-1 after beating Indiana. 4-2 after losing to Northwestern. 4-3 after losing to USC. Four and 6 after losing to Minnesota. 4-7 after losing to Oregon. 5-7 after losing to beating Rutgers. Ooh, wait, that doesn't make sense. Let me go back. Let me restart. So they beat UConn 1-0, lose to Michigan State 1-1, beat Virginia 2-1, beat Villanova 3-1, lose to Indiana 3-2, lose to Northwestern 3-3, lose to USC 3-4, lose to Minnesota 3-5, lose to Oregon 3-6, beat Rutgers 4-6, beat Indiana 5-6, and lose to Penn State 5-7. So Indiana goes, Maryland goes 5-7. So now we get to Michigan State next. So Michigan State, they start the year at home against FAU. I think they beat FAU. They beat Maryland, so they're 2-0. They beat Prairie View A&M 3-0. Beat Boston College 4-0. So they go into the Ohio State game 4-0. I think they lose to Ohio State, lose to Oregon, so they're 4-2. Then they come out of the bye week 4-2. They play Iowa at home, loss 4-3, lose to Michigan 4-4, beat Indiana 5-4, beat Illinois 6-4, beat Purdue 7-4, lose to Rutgers 7-5. No, lose to Rutgers 6-6. So Michigan State's official record prediction for me is 6-6. Next is Michigan. And like I said earlier, Michigan fans, unfortunately, I don't think you're going to like the outcome here. So week 1, they play Fresno State. I think they're going to beat Fresno State. I've already looked at the line for that. It is ugly. I think they beat Fresno State easily. So they're 1-0. Then week 2, they play Texas. And I understand it's at the big house, but something tells me that Texas is going to beat Michigan. So Michigan's 1-1. Arkansas State's going to be a win. So they're 2-1. USC is going to be a loss, 2-2. They beat Minnesota. They beat Minnesota to go to 2-1, 2-2. To go to 3-2. They beat Minnesota. They go to Washington, a national championship rematch. They lose to Washington 3-3. Beat Illinois 4-3. Beat Michigan State 4-3. Lose to Oregon 4-4. Beat Indiana 5-4. Beat Northwestern 6-4. Lose to Ohio State 6-5. So their regular season, my prediction for Michigan is they go 6-5 with a chance for a 7th win in a bowl game. Now we get Northwestern. So Northwestern starts the year, Miami of Ohio at home. I think they beat Miami of Ohio 1-0, beat Duke 2-0, beat Eastern Illinois 3-0. Then they lose to Washington, so they're 3-1. Beat Indiana 4-1. Beat Maryland 5-1. Lose to Wisconsin 5-2. Lose to Iowa 5-3. Beat Purdue 6-3. Lose to Ohio State 6-4. Lose to Michigan 6-5, and beat Illinois 7-5. So Northwestern's record prediction for me in 2024 is 7-5. Now we get to Minnesota. So Minnesota, they start the year at home against North Carolina. I think that's going to be a loss to their 0-1. They beat Rhode Island 1-1, beat Nevada 2-1, lose to Iowa 2-2, lose to Michigan 2-3, beat USC 3-3, beat UCLA 4-3, beat Maryland 5-3, beat Illinois 6-3, lose to Rutgers 6-4, and then they beat Penn State 7-4. And they lose to Wisconsin 7-5. So Minnesota goes 7-5. Now we get UCLA. UCLA starts the year at Hawaii. Now, in any normal circumstance, I would say this is a loss, but I think they beat Hawaii. So they're 1-0. Then they play Indiana. That's a win. So they're 2-0. They play at LSU. I absolutely do not think they beat LSU. So they're 2-1. They go to Oregon. That's going to be a loss. 2-2. Penn State's going to be a loss. 2-3. Minnesota's a win. No, Minnesota's a loss. 2-5. Beat Rutgers 3-5. Beat Nebraska 4-5. Beat Iowa 5-5. Lose to Washington 5-6. Beat USC 6-6. 6-5. And lose to Fresno State 6-6. So UCLA in their first year in the Big Ten goes 6-6. Here we go. So USC. Now we get into my sleepers in the Big Ten. And the first one is USC. So they start the year at Las Vegas against LSU. I think they lose to LSU. So they're 0-1. Then they get Utah State at home. I think they beat Utah State. So they're 1-1. Then they beat Michigan at Michigan. So they're 2-1. They welcome Wisconsin to Los Angeles. I think they beat Wisconsin. So they're 3-1. They beat Minnesota to go to 4-1. Then they lose to Penn State. So they're 4-2. They get Maryland, Rutgers, and Washington. I think they go 1-2. So they beat Maryland, which makes them 5-2. They lose to Rutgers 5-3, lose to Washington 5-4, lose to Nebraska 5-5. Oh, wait, no, I need to redo that because I said 9-3. So I think they're going to beat LSU, beat Utah State, so they're 2-0. Lose to Michigan 2-1, beat Wisconsin 3-1, lose to Minnesota 4-1. Lose to Penn State 4-2, beat Maryland 5-2, beat Rutgers 6-2. I think somehow they beat Washington to go to 7-2. They lose to Nebraska. They beat UCLA, so they're 8-3, and I think they beat Notre Dame to go to 9-3. So USC's first year in the Big Ten is successful. They go 9-3. Now we get Washington. Washington starts the year at home against Weber State. They're going to win their first 2 games. Weber State and Eastern Michigan are both wins. Then they play the Apple Cup against Washington State. I think they start the year 3-0. They're going to start the year 4-0 after beating Northwestern. Then they start the year 5-0 after beating Rutgers. Then they lose to Michigan and Iowa. So they're 5-2. Come out of the bye week. They're going to be 6-2 after beating Indiana. 6-3 after losing to USC. They beat Penn State to go to 7-2. Lose to UCLA 7-3. And they beat Oregon to go to 8-3. So Washington's first year in the Big Ten, they finished 8-3. Next, we've got Iowa. And let me get their schedule up. They start the year at home against Illinois State. That's going to be a win. Then they play the Iowa Corn Cyhawk series against Iowa State. They're going to be 2-0. They're going to be 3-0 after beating Troy. I think they're 4-0 after beating Minnesota. So they're 4-0 going into the Ohio State game. That's where I think, and it's at Ohio State this year. I think they lose. So they're 4-1. Then they play Washington at home. 5-1. Beat Michigan State 6-1. Beat Northwestern 7-1. Lose to Wisconsin 7-2. Beat UCLA 8-2. Beat Maryland 9-2. Lose to Nebraska 9-3. So Iowa will go 9-3. Now we get to the contenders in the Big Ten. And the first one is Wisconsin. Wisconsin starts the year with 2 games that are easy, and then so they're going to start 2-0. Then circle September 14th. Saturday, September 14th. Right now it's a 12 o'clock game against Alabama at Camp Randall. This is not going to be an easy game for Wisconsin. Do they win? To me, it's a coin toss. I think they're going to lose. So they're 2-1. Then they get USC at USC. I think they go to Pasadena to Los Angeles and lose. So they're 2-2. They have room for one more loss. They beat Purdue 3-2. Beat Rutgers 4-2. Beat Northwestern 5-2. Lose to Penn State 5-3. Beat Iowa 6-3. Lose to Oregon 7-4. Beat Nebraska 8-4, and beat North Minnesota 9-4. So they go 9-4. Does Wisconsin? We got Rutgers next. And this is going to be So Rutgers, they start the year at home against Howard. I think they beat Howard, so they're 1-0. They beat Akron. Akron's going to be one of the worst teams in college football, so they're 2-0. Then week 4, they go to Virginia Tech. And I think they're going to lose to Va Tech. So they're 2-1. Then they get Washington. They're going to be 2-2. Nebraska, 3-2. They're going to beat Nebraska. They'll lose to Wisconsin 3-3. Beat UCLA 4-3. Lose to USC 4-4. Beat Minnesota 5-4. Beat Maryland 6-4. Beat Illinois 7-4. And lose to Michigan State 7-5. So Rutgers goes 7-5 this year. Is my record prediction. Then we get to Nebraska. Nebraska week 1, they play Utah. That's going to be a win. Then they get Colorado at home this year. That, to me, is going to be the game of the week in week number 2. It's Colorado. Now, are they going to beat Colorado? Maybe. I think they do. So they're 2-0. They play Northern Iowa. Win 3-0. Win against Illinois 4-0. Win at Purdue 5-0. Lose to Rutgers 5-1. Then they come off the bye week. They play at Indiana 6-1. That's a win. 6-2 after they lose to Ohio State. 7-2 after beating UCLA. 7-3 after losing to USC. 7-4 after losing to Wisconsin, and 8-4 after beating Iowa. So I think Nebraska goes 8-4 this year. And now we get to the teams that I think are the contenders to win the Big Ten. First one is Ohio State. So they got Akron week 1. I think they're going to beat Akron badly. I've already looked at the point spread. It's minus 50.5 in favor of Ohio State. So they're 1-0. They beat Western Michigan 2-0. They beat Marshall to go to 3-0. I think they're going to beat Michigan State to go to 4-0. Beat Iowa to go to 5-0. Then they get Oregon October 12th in Autzen at Oregon. I think they beat Oregon. So they're now 5-0. 6-0. Then they get Nebraska. That's going to be another win. So they're 7-0. Now you get to Penn State. And it's at Penn State this year. And this might be the whiteout game. We don't know. I think they beat Penn State. So they're 8-0. They play Purdue. Now, Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana. Those could all three be trap games. Mark my words. Those could all three be trap games because Ohio State could be looking ahead to the last game of the season at home against Michigan. I think they beat Purdue. So they're 8-0. I think they beat Northwestern 9-0. I think they beat Indiana to go to 10-0. And I think they're going to beat Michigan this year to go to 11-0. Now we get next is Oregon. Let's go look at Oregon's schedule. So Oregon, they start the year at home against Idaho. That's an easy win, so they're 1-0. I think they beat Boise State, so they're going to be 2-0. Then they get Oregon State. That's going to be a win, 3-0. I think they beat UCLA, so they're 4-0. Beat Michigan State 5-0. They lose to Ohio State to go to 5-1. Beat Purdue 6-1. Beat Illinois 7-1. I think they beat Michigan to go to 8-1. Beat Maryland 9-1. Lose to Wisconsin 9-2. And then beat Washington 10-2. And my Big Ten championship game is going to be Oregon and Ohio State, with the winner being Ohio State. And that wraps up this edition of the Fourth and Long podcast. I will see everyone back here for another podcast episode in a few days. Have a wonderful rest of your day.